Chapter 7. A Surfeit of Rulers. Ale men are sinners, the fathers of the faith teach us. Even the noblest of kings and the most chivalrous of knights may find themselves overcome by rage and lust and envy, and commit acts that shame them and tarnish their good names. And the vilest of men and the wickedest of women likewise may do good from time to time, for love and compassion and pity may be found in even the blackest of hearts. We are as the gods made us, wrote Septon Barth. The wisest man ever to serve is the hand of the king, strong and weak, good and bad, cruel and kind, heroic and selfish. Know that if you would rule over the kingdoms of men. Seldom was the truth of his words seen as clearly as during the 50th year after Aegon's conquest. As the new year dawned, all across the realm plans were being made to mark a half-century of Targaryen rule over Westeros with feasts, fairs, and tourneys. The horrors of King Maegor's rule were receding into the past, the Iron Throne and the Faith were reconciled, and the young King Jaehaerys I was the darling of smallfolk and great lords alike from Aldtown to the Wall. Yet unbeknownst to all but a few, storm clouds were gathering on the horizon, and faintly in the distance wise men could hear a rumble of thunder. A realm with two kings is like a man with two heads, the smallfolk are wont to say. In 50 AC, the realm of Westeros found itself blessed with one king, a hand, and three queens, as in King Maegor's day. But whereas Maegor's queens had been consorts, subservient to his will, living and dying at his whim, each of the queens of the half-century was a power in her own right. In the Red Keep of King's Landing sat the Queen Regent Alyssa, widow of the late King Aenys, mother to his son Jaehaerys, and wife to the King's Hand, Rhaegar Baratheon. Just across Blackwater Bay on Dragonstone, a younger queen had arisen when Alyssa's daughter Alysanne, a maid of 13 years, had pledged her troth to her brother King Jaehaerys, against the wishes of her mother and her mother's lord husband. And far to the west on Fair Isle, with the whole width of Westeros separating her from both mother and sister, was Alyssa's eldest daughter, the dragonrider Rhaena Targaryen, widow of Prince Aegon the Uncrowned. In the Westerlands, Riverlands, and parts of the Reach, men were already calling her the Queen in the West. Two sisters and a mother, the three queens were bound by blood and grief and suffering. And yet between them lay shadows old and new, growing darker by the day. The amity and unity of purpose that had enabled Jaehaerys, his sisters, and their mother to topple Maegor the Cruel had begun to fray, as long-simmering resentments and divisions made themselves felt. For the remainder of the regency the boy king and his little queen would find themselves deeply at odds with the King's Hand and the Queen Regent, in a rivalry that would continue into Jaehaerys's own reign and threaten to plunge the Seven Kingdoms back into war. The immediate cause of the tension was the king's sudden and secret marriage to his sister, which had taken the Hand and the Queen Regent unawares and thrown their own plans and schemes into disarray. It would be a mistake to believe that was the sole cause of the estrangement. However, the other weddings that had made 49 AC the year of the three brides had also left scars. Lord Rhaegar had never asked Jaehaerys for leave to wed his mother, an omission the boy king took for a sign of disrespect. Moreover, his grace did not approve of the match. As he would later confess to Septon Barth, he valued Lord Rhaegar as a counselor and friend, but he did not need a second father, and thought his own judgment, temperament, and intelligence to be superior to his Hand's. Jaehaerys also felt he should have been consulted about his sister Rhaena's marriage, though he felt that slight less keenly. Queen Alyssa, for her part, was deeply hurt that she had neither been advised of nor invited to Rhaena's wedding on Fair Isle. Away in the west, Rhaena Targaryen nursed her own grievances. As she confided to the old friends and favorites she had gathered around her, Queen Rhaena neither understood nor shared her mother's affection for Rhaegar Baratheon. Though she honored him grudgingly for rising in support of her brother Jaehaerys against their uncle Maegor, his inaction when her own husband, Prince Aegon, faced Maegor in the battle beneath the God's Eye was something she could neither forget nor forgive. Also, with the passage of time Queen Rhaena grew ever more resentful that her own claim to the Iron Throne, and that of her daughters, had been disregarded in favor of that of my baby brother, as she was wont to call Jaehaerys. She was the firstborn, she reminded those who would listen, and had been a dragonrider before any of her siblings, yet all of them and, even my own mother, had conspired to pass her over. Looking back now with the benefit of hindsight, it is easy to say that Jaehaerys and Alysanne had the right of it in the conflicts that arose during the last year of their mother's regency, and to cast Queen Alyssa and Lord Rhaegar as villains. That is how the singers tell the tale. Certainly, the swift and sudden marriage of Jaehaerys and Alysanne was a romance unequaled since the days of Florian the Fool and his jonquil, to hear them sing of it. And in songs, as ever, love conquers all. The truth, we submit, is a deal less simple. Queen Alyssa's misgivings about the match grew out of genuine concern for her children, the Targaryen dynasty, and the realm as a whole. Nor were her fears without foundation. Lord Rhaegar Baratheon's motives were less selfless. A proud man, he had been stunned and angered by the ingratitude of the boy king he had regarded as a son, and humiliated when forced to back down at the gates of Dragonstone before 100 of his men. A warrior to the bone, Rhaegar had once dreamed of facing Maegor the Cruel in single combat, and could not stomach being shamed by a lad of 15 years. Lest we think too harshly of him, however, we would do well to remember Septon Barth's words. Though he would do some cruel, foolish, and evil things during his last year as Hand, he was not a cruel or evil man at heart, nor even a fool. He had been a hero once, and we must remember that even as we look at the darkest year of his life. In the immediate aftermath of his confrontation with Jaehaerys, Lord Rhaegar could think of little else but the humiliation he had suffered. His lordship's first impulse was to return to Dragonstone with more men, enough to overwhelm the castle garrison and resolve the situation by force. As for the Kingsguard, Lord Rhaegar reminded the council that the White Swords had sworn to lay down their lives for the king, and I shall be pleased to give them that honor. When Lord Tully pointed out that Jaehaerys could simply close the gates of Dragonstone against them, Lord Rhaegar was undeterred. Let him. I can take the castle by storm if need be. In the end only Queen Alyssa could reach his lordship through his wrath and dissuade him from this folly. My love, she said softly, my children ride dragons, and we do not. The Queen Regent, no less than her husband, wished to have the king's rash marriage undone, for she was convinced that word of it would once again set the faith against the crown. Her fears were fanned by Septon Matthias, once away from Jaehaerys, and secure in the knowledge that his lips would not be sewn shut, the Septon found his tongue again, and spoke of little else but how all decent folk would condemn the king's incestuous union, had Jaehaerys and Alysanne returned to King's Landing in time to celebrate the new year. As Queen Alyssa prayed they will come to their senses and repent this folly, she told the council reconciliation might have been possible, but that did not happen. When a fortnight came and went and then another, and still the king did not reappear at court, Alyssa announced her intention to return to Dragonstone, this time alone, to beg her children to come home. Lord Rhaegar angrily forbade it. If you go crawling back to him, the boy will never listen to you again, he said. He has put his own desires ahead of the good of the realm, and that cannot be allowed. Do you want him to end as his father did? And so the queen bent to his will and did not go. That Queen Alyssa wished to do the right thing, no man should doubt, Septon Barth wrote years later. Sad to say, however, she oft seemed at a loss as to what that thing might be. She desired above all to be loved, admired, and praised, a yearning she shared with King Aenys, her first husband. A ruler must sometimes do things that are necessary but unpopular, however, though he knows that opprobrium and censure must surely follow. These things Queen Alyssa could seldom bring herself to do. Days passed and turned to weeks and thence to fortnights, whilst hearts hardened and men grew more resolute on both sides of Blackwater Bay. The boy king and his little queen remained on Dragonstone, awaiting the day when Jaehaerys would take the rule of the Seven Kingdoms in his own hands. Queen Alyssa and Lord Rhaegar continued to hold the reins of power in King's Landing, searching for a way to undo the king's marriage and avert the calamity they were certain was to come. Aside from the council, they told no one of what had transpired on Dragonstone, and Lord Rhaegar commanded the men who had accompanied them to speak no word of what they had seen, at the penalty of losing their tongues. Once the marriage had been annulled, his lordship reasoned, it would be as if it had never happened so far as most of Westeros was concerned, so long as it remained secret. Until the union was consummated, it could still easily be set aside. This would prove to be a vain hope, as we know now, but to Rhaegar Baratheon in 50 AC it seemed possible. For a time he must surely have drawn encouragement from the king's own silence. Jaehaerys had moved swiftly to marry Alysanne, but having done the deed he seemed in no great haste to announce it. He certainly had the means to do so, had he so desired. Maester Culiper, still spry at 80, had been serving since Queen Visenia's day, and was ably assisted by two younger maesters. Dragonstone had a full complement of ravens. At a word from Jaehaerys, his marriage could have been proclaimed from one end of the realm to the other. He did not speak that word. Scholars have debated ever since as to the reasons for his silence. Was he repenting a match made in haste, as Queen Alyssa would have wished? Had Alysanne somehow offended him? Had he grown fearful of the realm's response to the marriage, recalling all that had befallen Aegon and Rhaena? Was it possible that Septon Matthias's dire prophecies had shaken him more than he cared to admit? Or was he simply a boy of 15 who had acted rashly with no thought to the consequences, only to find himself now at a loss as to how to proceed? Arguments can and have been made for all these explanations, but in light of what we know now about Jaehaerys I Targaryen, they ultimately ring hollow. Young or old, this was a king who never acted without thinking. To this writer it seems plain that Jaehaerys was not repenting his marriage and had no intention of undoing it. He had chosen the queen he wanted and would make the realm aware of that in due course, but at a time of his own choosing, in a manner best calculated to lead to acceptance, when he was a man grown and a king ruling in his own right, not a boy who had wed in defiance of his regent's wishes. The young king's absence from court did not go unnoticed for long. The ashes of the bonfires lit in celebration of the new year had scarce grown cold before the people of King's Landing began asking questions. To curtail the rumors, Queen Alyssa put out word that His Grace was resting and reflecting on Dragonstone, the ancient seat of his house. But as more time passed, with still no sign of Jaehaerys, lords and smallfolk alike began to wonder. Was the king ill? Had he been made a prisoner, for reasons yet unknown? The personable and handsome boy king had moved amongst the people of King's Landing so freely, seemingly delighting in mingling with them, that this sudden disappearance seemed unlike him. Queen Alysanne, for her part, was in no haste to return to court. Here I have you to myself, day and night, she told Jaehaerys. When we go back, I shall be fortunate to snatch an hour with you, for every man in Westeros will want a piece of you. For her, these days on Dragonstone were an idyll. Many years from now when we are old and grey, we shall look back upon these days and smile, remembering how happy we were. Jaehaerys himself no doubt shared some of these sentiments, but the young king had other reasons for remaining on Dragonstone. Unlike his uncle Maegor, he was not prone to bursts of rage, but he was more than capable of anger, and he would never forget nor forgive his deliberate exclusion from the council meetings wherein his marriage and that of his sister were being discussed. And whilst he would always remain grateful to Rhaegar Baratheon for helping him to the Iron Throne, Jaehaerys did not intend to be ruled by him. I had one father, he said to Maester Culiper during those days on Dragonstone, I do not require a second. The king recognized and appreciated the virtues of the hand, but he was aware of his flaws as well, flaws that had become very apparent in the days leading up to the Golden Wedding, when Jaehaerys himself had sat in audience with the lords of the realm whilst Lord Rhaegar was hunting, drinking, and deflowering maidens. Jaehaerys was aware of his own shortcomings, two shortcomings he intended to rectify before he sat the Iron Throne. His father, King Aenys, had been slighted as weak, in part because he was not the warrior that his brother Maegor was. Jaehaerys was determined that no man would ever question his own courage or skill at arms. On Dragonstone he had Sir Merrill Bullock, commander of the castle garrison, his sons Sir Alan and Sir Howard, a seasoned master at arms in Sir Elias Scales, and his own 7, the finest fighters in the realm. Every morning Jaehaerys trained with them in the castle yard, shouting at them to come at him harder, to press him, harry him, and attack him in every way they knew. From sunrise till noon he worked with them, honing his skills with sword and spear and mace and axe whilst his new queen looked on. It was a hard and brutal regimen. Each bout ended only when the king himself or his opponent declared him dead. Jaehaerys died so often that the men of the garrison made a game of it, shouting, "The king is dead," every time he fell, and, "Long live the king," when he struggled to his feet. His foes began a contest, wagering with one another to see which of them could kill the king the most. The victor, we are told, was young Surfeit the woodcock, whose darting spear purportedly gave his grace fits. Jaehaerys was oft bruised and bloody by evening, to Alysanne's distress, but his prowess improved so markedly that near the end of his time on Dragonstone, old Sir Elias himself told him, "Your Grace, you will never be a Kingsguard, but if by some sorcery your uncle Maegor himself were to rise from the grave, my coin would be on you."